Hello again, everybody. This is Rogers Harrison. Welcome to another edition of the Sports Deep Dive Podcast. Sports Deep Dive Podcast, I want to remind you, is commercial free. And we try to give you a condensed podcast so you can listen to it on your commute to work or other various things, and it doesn't take up most of your day. Sports Deep Dive Podcast is recorded on the Podbean Network. I'm joined today by Brian Coppert. Brian, how are you?
I'm wonderful, Rogers. How are you?
I'm doing well. Brian, today we're going to talk about Major League Baseball's spring training.
Ah, very cool.
Now, before we get into spring training, I want to tell you, this podcast is not going to give you every single movement of these teams in spring training throughout the years, because that would bore audience to death, and they might contact Podbean and say, get this guy off your platform. So we're not going to do that. So I'm just going to give you like an overview of the spring training, if that works for you. Does that work for you, Brian?
Works for me, Rogers.
All right. So in the early days of baseball, many teams use gymnasiums or other inside areas for training, right?
Right.
That's what they did during the wintertime, because fields weren't available because they were covered in snow or it was very cold outside. Because if you remember, baseball started as a northeast sport.
Yeah.
A lot of teams in it, and it just grew westward and south. So the New York Mutuals, heard of them?
Once.
Okay, the New York Mutuals were initially formed from the fighter fighters of New York's Mutual Hook and Ladder Company, number 1.
Okay.
All right, and they became perhaps the first baseball team to hold a spring training outside of their home when in 1869, that's a long time ago, Boss Tweed sent the Mutuals south to New Orleans to prepare for the season.
Wow.
Now, are you familiar with Boss Tweed? Do you remember him from history?
Yeah, a little.
Boss Tweed took control of the Mutuals in 1864 and operated the team until his arrest following the deadly riots of 1871 and the public exposure of his corruption that followed. All right? So Boss Tweed,
was a gangster.
Well, yeah, I can neither confirm nor deny that, Brian. But if you want to know more about Boss Tweed, you can Google him. But that's what happened. Boss Tweed, 1869, they went down to New Orleans, and then 1871, he's no longer in control of the Mutuals. So in the 1870s, several clubs began following the example set by the Mutuals by training in warmer climates. New Orleans was a popular location for spring training in the 19th century, but teams also trained in Washington, D.C., Savannah, Georgia, and Cape May, New Jersey. And it's funny because you don't think of Washington, D.C. and Cape May, New Jersey as,
warmer climates.
Good spring training sites. So in 1888, the Washington Nationals, not our current Washington Nationals, Brian, don't get excited.
The original ones.
In 1888, the Washington Nationals became the first club to hold spring training in Florida.
Ah.
The practice was not universally adopted, though. Critics, including Chicago player-manager Camp Anson of the Chicago Cubs, argued that the players would be more prone to sore muscles and colds after returning to their colder home climates.
Okay. I mean, I can see his thought pattern there.
Yeah. So remember that. Camp Anson, Chicago was like, no, don't do this.
We'll train in the snow.
It's fine. Don't do this. Front page of the maiden issue of the Sporting News on March 17th, 1886. maiden issue of the Sporting News. The baseball world read that the Chicago White Stockings, which are the forerunner of the Cubs, not to be confused with the Chicago White Sox of the American League today. Chicago White Stockings became the Chicago Cubs. We can talk more about that in another podcast. Plan to conduct their spring training in Hot Springs, Arkansas.
Ooh!
Yeah. So Spalding convinced his manager, Cap Anson, to send a physically fit team into the field when the National League opened their season in April. So, the owner had to say, look, Cap, come on.
Right.
We're going to send them down. All right?
It's happening.
Get with the program. All right?
Right. We want them to be physically fit.
Yeah.
And they can't train in the snow.
Get with the program or,
These are baseball players.
We're going to ship you up to Peoria.
Whatever.
Now, the main reason Spalding sent his team to Hot Springs for 2 weeks was for the players to bathe in the hot springs in hopes of clearing their bodies of alcohol. Thereby, they could lose weight and enhancing their physical conditions. Because, everyone believed that...
hot springs were...
you could bathe in it and have the chemicals needed to make you healthy.
Yeah. Detox.
Yes. Now, Spalding also believed that the southern weather would be more conducive for training than the colder weather in the north. And the players could get their legs in shape and they could build stamina by climbing mountains.
Okay.
So, yeah, that's good. That's good stuff. So early training sites included the St. Louis Cardinals in Hot Springs and Tulsa. They went to Tulsa, Oklahoma. The New York Yankees went to New Orleans and later Phoenix, Arizona, when the team was owned by the Chicago Cubs. Went to Los Angeles when the team was owned by William Wrigley Jr. And the thing about that is that Wrigley also owned a minor league team that played in Los Angeles.
Oh.
So that was their connection there. St. Louis Browns and later the Kansas City Athletics in San Diego. And then in West Palm Beach, the Pittsburgh Pirates in Dawson Springs, Kentucky around 1950 and Honolulu.
Oh.
And I don't know if you know this or not, but the Pirates for many years had a AAA affiliate was in Hawaii.
Oh. I didn't know that. That's cool.
Yeah. So other teams joined in the fray of training and warmer climates in the early 1940s. The Detroit Tigers, you're familiar with them. You saw them as a boy.
Yep.
That was. They're credited with being the first team to conduct spring training camp in Arizona.
Okay.
They trained in Phoenix at Riverside Park at Central Avenue and the Salt River in 1929.
Wow. It's pretty early on.
Yeah. Okay, so speaking of Phoenix, the Cactus League became a reality in 1947. Horace Stoneham's New York Giants and Bill Veck's Cleveland Indians took up residence in Phoenix and Tucson, respectively. Veck ended up in Tucson wasn't a surprise. He owned ranches in the Southwest and at the time owned a ranch near Tucson.
Okay.
And Stoneham was a natural for Phoenix as he developed business interests in the area. And when the New York Giants became the San Francisco Giants, they had their affiliate, AAA affiliate, was in West Phoenix.
Oh.
Before the Diamondbacks were born. So by this time, and we're looking at, the mid to late 40s.
Right.
Into the 50s. By this time, spring training was a formalized institution. It was, something. I mean, you have the Cactus League, which is the teams training in Arizona, and you have what was known as the Grapefruit League, which is the teams training in Florida.
Okay.
Teams realized there was money to be made from spring training because there's money to be made for everything.
Right.
And over years, many teams try to combine some sort of real estate development with spring training. Horace Stoneham ended up developing a luxury resort centered around the San Francisco Giants' spring training routines. And I'll let you know. Holman Stadium's baseball stadium in Vero Beach, Florida, was built in 1953 from an abandoned naval base.
Oh.
To accommodate spring training for the then Brooklyn Dodgers.
Okay.
Now here's the interesting thing. The Dodgers continued to train in Vero Beach, Florida, until 2008.
In that same facility?
In that same facility. And it was renamed Dodger Town.
Okay.
But
I've heard of Dodger Town.
Because it was, and since they built their complex from that naval base, they had, all the fields that they needed.
Barracks.
They had the barracks for not only their major league club, but their minor leaguers as well. But of course, as time went on and these Dodgers became rich.
Right. That wasn't a good enough accommodation.
Most of the major leaguers would rent out condos or something in town, and the minor leaguers stayed in what was once the
major leaguers' barracks. Right.
Yeah. And so, and other teams started to copy that. Like if you've ever been to Bradenton, Florida, there is a Pirate City, which is where their minor leaguers are housed during spring training. I've been to Pirate City, and it's way back. I mean, it's not supposed to be for the public. It's just way back in the middle of nowhere.
I gotcha. A good place for them to retreat to after.
But getting back to the Dodgers. All right, so the Dodgers moved from Brooklyn to Los Angeles in 1958, right?
Right.
The first season wasn't. And so the owner of the Dodgers at that time, Peter O'Malley, didn't want to move their spring training because they had just, having built up the naval base, it was a big investment. Earlier, yeah, right. 1953. So that's why they trained there until 2008. And, the Dodgers would play their spring training games at 1 o'clock Eastern, which is 10 a.m. back in Los Angeles. But, the Dodgers would put it on the radio.
Yep.
For people, 10 a.m., 10 o'clock in the morning.
Time to fire up my game.
Brunch with the Dodgers. So, 35 different Florida sites have held spring training. Excuse me. All but 6 of today's major league teams trained in Florida. And the only ones that haven't trained in Florida ever are the Anaheim Angels, the Milwaukee Brewers. I'm sorry. The Los Angeles Angels. Excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
The Milwaukee Brewers, the Seattle Mariners, the San Diego Padres, the Colorado Rockies, and of course the Arizona Diamondbacks.
Because why would they leave?
Right.
Right. I get the Colorado Rockies too. They probably train like in Arizona or out in.
No, they train in Arizona.
Yeah.
They're in the Cactus League.
Yeah, and then it makes sense also for other West Coast teams not to come traipsing all the way across to Florida.
Right, but the point is the fact that everybody but 6, and those 6 I just mentioned, have at one point have trained in Florida.
In Florida at some point.
Yeah.
Right.
Like the San Francisco Giants, who were the New York Giants, and the LA Dodgers, who we just talked about. I think that's interesting.
It is interesting.
I just think that's interesting.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that the Dodgers did it for so long.
Yeah.
You get the investment and all that, but 2008, that's a long time. Like they got their money's worth out of that place.
53 to 2008.
Right. Way before that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Over 50 years. The Florida cities with the most years in spring training are St. Petersburg and Tampa with 87 years and counting. Bradenton and Clearwater, 76 years. Lakeland, home of your Detroit Tigers, 75 years. Sarasota's 74 years. Sarasota's had the Reds, the White Sox. I think now the Orioles are there. Fort Myers, 64 years. West Palm Beach, 63 years. Orlando, 62. Vero Beach, 58 years. So even though the Dodgers are gone, they've had the most years, or one of the most years for spring training in Florida. Winter Haven was at 55 years. You've had teams like go back and forth, like Cleveland, trained in Arizona, and then went to Florida, and now they're back in Arizona. They took the Reds with them. Kansas City's one of those others. Arizona, Florida, Arizona. So, in fact, the Arizona's Cactus League has made inroads in luring teams from Florida. And now you've got 15 and 15. You got 15 trained in Florida and 15 trained in Arizona.
Okay.
And when I was growing up, when there were only 26 to 28 teams, you had, no, it was about 26. It was 12 and 14. 8 trained in Arizona, and everyone else trained in Florida.
Oh, okay. So it was an imbalance.
If you ever looked at a spring training schedule for the Arizona clubs, a lot of split squads
to make it up, so they could
play their 30 spring training games.
Right.
And, it's like, oh, we're playing the Brewers again. Okay. There have been some assault on the Florida-Arizona spring training setup. Most recently, Las Vegas officials have wooed several teams in an attempt to lure 4 of them to train in Vegas. Their efforts have failed. It's now Arizona and Florida.
Well, it makes more sense, really, for the teams to pick one or the other, and really for them to stay, like you were saying, not having to have the split squads, not play the same team. They still play the same team a lot, but it's, I think it's beneficial to them to be either all in one location or in the 2 locations. And I really think the 2 locations are probably good, right? Because you wouldn't want a spring training league where you were playing every other team in the MLB. I don't know. Maybe. But
they still have split squad games just so they can take a look at the minor leaguers. And they have minor league spring training games.
Right, but I'm saying
generally in the morning.
Yeah, but I'm just saying you don't want to be the 4 teams in Vegas trying to figure out playing the other 3 teams 175 times.
Vegas was hoping if they got 4,
they could get more.
And then they could say, "Oh, this is a great setup here."
Right.
And then they could.
It's also, I know it's hot in Arizona too, but it seems like it. But in Arizona right now, though, it's in the 50s and 60s, not 101. Right. So yeah.
Only the Diamondbacks have to deal with that.
Right.
During the season. So anyway, that's our podcast. That was spring training in a nutshell. And like I said, I didn't go into this.
Right.
In 1948, this team played in Arizona, but then they switched over to New Orleans, and then they switched
because there was a lot of operations and everything to a whole nother city for a period of time. Scouts, everybody have to travel. It's a lot.
Yeah, I think that I follow the Atlanta Braves, and I was, looking at their social media accounts, and I think that they packed up a week before their players, their pitchers and catchers were to report, and Atlanta they train in, they go down to Florida, in kind of the middle of the state, not north or not south. And so they went out a week before, got the truck all loaded up and stuff. But if you're what about Cincinnati?
Right.
who has to go all the way to Arizona. I wonder when they left and set up camp.
Yeah.
Because it probably took them a week to drive down there.
Right.
Drive to
Or it's at least a couple of days minimum.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah.
And who knows what they would stay so their truck wouldn't get raided and robbed. When Atlanta could just do it all in
one day.
Yeah.
So, well, cool.
All right. Well, that concludes this podcast. Reminder that Brian Koperek has a YouTube channel called Random Things with BK. It's a DIY. He is a DIY coach, and he'll get you educated on projects around the house and in the car or for the car. Like you had a change in your oil and changing filters, cabin filters.
Yeah,
And,
windshield wipers, doing brake job. We've done several videos on car
cars.
maintenance.
Yes.
Yep.
So be sure to check that out. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast if you haven't already, please. And I can be found on Blue Sky, and I'm at 318 North. So until next time, this is Rogers Harrison for Brian Koperek saying so long, everyone.